It's the tune in with Power Psychology and Associates with your host, Brittany Meredith. How are you doing today, Brittany?
Good, how are you?
Good. So we're going to do a quick
introduction from home.
Yes, and we're going to do a quick introduction, and then we'll be visiting with someone else. So just fill us in what's going on today.
Yeah, so today we're going to have Uzma Williams here. She's a current student of ours at Power Psychology. Sorry, catching things here. She's a sessional instructor in the psychology department at Concordia University.
Thanks, Brittany. Hello, Uzma. How are you doing?
I'm good. Thank you, James.
Excellent. It's so good to have you on the show. And so we got a nice introduction from Brittany, but tell us a little bit more about yourself, because, you know, there's certainly a lot more to you. And then let's just talk about mental health.
Okay, so I have a doctorate degree from McMaster University. The focus is on childhood development and rehabilitation. So we undermine any physical disabilities, any kind of dysfunction, and we really maximize function, modifying the environment to help that child. So it's a very patient-centered approach. I am a sessional instructor in the psychology department at Concordia University of Edmonton. I also have a book authored titled Police Response to Mental Health.
Excellent. So in your you're doing sessional work, so you're on two different campuses. So as you went into COVID, you must have saw the systems sort of stretch. And where did you see sort of validations of what you've learned and what you've experienced, and what sort of made you look for more information, because it wasn't something that you were recognizing?
So we're seeing more of it open up now, especially as COVID was really, just everyone was really isolated in the home. That's when you really saw the mental health issues starting to arise. And a lot of mental health symptoms, a lot of mental health concerns, they maximize when we are in a very stressful period. It's usually right during the stressful period or shortly afterwards. For example, about 40% of people will experience some sort of clinical anxiety in their life, and it might not be at this exact moment, okay? That clinical anxiety might hit a little afterwards. For example, for our students, exam time is a high anxiety situation, okay? And that's across the board. But for a lot of people, their anxiety might not peak till about a month or two after even. For example, final exams, they usually occur the first or second week of December, but it's usually around Christmas time when the student has a really down period, when their anxiety just completely peaks and overtakes. And that's when you realize, okay, I don't know what's happening, I'm confused, I don't know what to do. So mental health, it's encompassing in a lot of different areas. We usually think of mental health as just emotional functioning, but mental health is physical functioning, somatic complaints, so physical issues, just negative thinking, feeling down. For example, when I'm really stressed out, I don't get really emotionally dysregulated or really depressed or anything, but I feel it in my body. My legs feel heavy. I get tension all the way down my neck. It's hard to like walk. It just feels really pressuresome. And so when you have dysfunction in the different areas, it shows up in how we think, how we feel, in behaviors that we avoid.
Now, there's lots to think about. So I just kind of want to get a feel from where you're coming from, because there's many schools of thought, some that are prevalent but have been discount or not discredited but set aside. You know, so as people are going into these stressful situations, you know, things like that come to my mind is it chemical imbalance? You know, is it people sort of, you know, panicking? They feel like they're in an existential emergency, or is it just coming up against, you know, problems of living that people see as fate, or, you know, outside sort of effects? Like, so, you know, where do you position yourself in that kind of view, and then we can visit from there.
And the environmental debate is really interesting. It's referred to as nature, which is your biology, and nurture, which is your environmental piece, okay? With our biology, this is predetermined by our genetics, by our brain structures, by our neurotransmitters and hormones and whatnot, okay? Our environment really depends on who we're interacting with, how much support and care we have, if we've just had a good and happy childhood, or if there have been events that are traumatic, that are very, or events that are perceived very stressful by a child. Okay, so for example, you can have a child who has a very strong disposition, biological disposition to schizophrenia. If that child grows up in a non-stressful environment, their biological disposition to schizophrenia might never trigger. So they might not have ever developed schizophrenia. Versus if they have a moderate biological disposition to schizophrenia, but they have a very hostile home environment where the parents are in high conflict, where they're highly critical, where there's little warmth and support, that child is much more likely to develop schizophrenia. On the other hand, if you have an environment that's very, very rich, very prosperous, so things are well, for example, you're living in Malibu, California, and your parents have a lot of money, that might help you to just, get through your life a little bit better versus someone who grows up in a very difficult environment. They might encounter more difficulties navigating through life, and their dispositions might show up a little bit more because of that. And on the other hand, when you think about the events that we experience in our life, for example, if you have a young child who's had a happy, healthy life, they may continue on there, but if something tragic happens, that child's trajectory might change, okay, into something very different. And then it takes time to recover from things like that. It takes time to build trust, and just build up a healthy environment again, healthy mindset again.
So the word mental illness, I've said it many times, and people think I'm just sort of talking about how old I am, but I'm like 57, so I've come through sort of a, not that necessarily definition, but how things are called has been changed. So it was more like a disorder, like mental health disorders is what,
right.
Is that sort of the same thing? Mental health illness? Is it what they used to call a disorder?
It is, but now we're recognizing that mental health, it's on a spectrum, okay? So we all have mental health concerns, we all have mental health symptoms. Some of us, we might have an actual illness, though, tied to that. And so what we want to be careful of, though, is our language that we use, okay? So not calling somebody else a mentally ill person, because our mental illness can be a part of us. It's not our whole being. So we can't encapsulate one person just by their illness. There's more to them. They might be a student. They might be so many other roles in society. We don't want to define the person with this stigma language. And I think in mental health, there's a huge stigma around the language used and what we see in popular culture as well.
So then, just like how we're sort of looking at, how do my ears and my nose and my throat feel in, cold and flu season, like all year long now, right? So you're sort of assessing yourself. So in terms of, depression, anxiety, not full out schizophrenia, but, am I flipping my perspective, unhealthily, eating disorders, addictive behaviors? Are these things sort of like a gradient? Just like I was like, my ears, my throat hurt. Do we look at ourselves like that? Should we self-analyze like that?
It's a good idea to always be reflective and think, well, what are my shortcomings? What are my cues? What are my triggers? And what can I do to help myself get by them? And again, it takes me back to that conversation we just had on dispositions. So nature versus nurture, okay? So depending on some individuals, one's stronger than the other, but our environment or our biology can really modify the interaction there. And the day-to-day experiences. For example, we can have just a perfect, happy-going life, but a critical situation can change the way we are. Like, for example, experiencing a traumatic event.
And we try to be, such wonderfully objective, beings, creatures, but we're very subjective, right? We were subjective in our objectivism, so now we're dealing with things that are, very personal: mood, thinking, behavior.
Yep.
Where's a wake up point? In this, as we were talking about those other kind of situations that are measuring points. Where do we wake up and say, I should give the office a call and at least have a consultation. I feel that, not just I feel I'm off here, but how do we identify that?
Okay, that's a very good question, because I'm of the opinion that we should all talk to someone at some point just to upkeep our mental health, just to target, okay, well, what can I want to work on? What do I need to work on? For example, a lot of therapists, they have their own therapist, just to keep on balance, just to keep identifying. If there's something significant in your life and it's really stopping you from engaging in certain behaviors that you enjoy. For example, if you enjoyed camping and all of a sudden you feel that you can't leave your house anymore, that's a perfectly good reason to come seek out a counselor. If you have had any sort of traumatic incident happen where it just keeps flashing in your mind over and over, or some sort of relationship breakup. So it's a great, vast, wide array of reasons why people come into counseling.
Interesting. I like the, this is the first time I've heard it, and I've asked a few people that are in the industry these kind of questions, but you're very clear of on balance and identifying. So if we're on balance and we're still identifying things, so we're conscious, I guess, we're aware, then as soon as we're feeling off of that. And then the other thing that you talked about that sort of gave light, you also talked about engagement in life. So if I'm not engaging in the things that normally make me happy, if I'm no longer identifying, that was tough though. If I'm no longer identifying, I'm not going to be able to identify that I need help. But feeling off balance. And I liked what you said about you feel it in your body. And I know what you mean. I've come from like a type 2 kind of diabetic kind of background. Okay. So I know what that, when anxiety affects it, and there's a feeling there. So that was very interesting and insightful. So your training then is young people?
Yes, younger people. That's okay. My area of passion. Another area of passion I see is, again, just identifying those mental health stigmas and breaking those barriers for everybody, not only children with disabilities, but any person with any sort of mental health illness. Because anytime we turn on popular media, we think about or we see images of people being called crazy or Looney Tunes or a psycho and whatnot. So it's a word that's taken really out of context. We often forget that the people experiencing this, they hurt a lot when you hear horrible assumptions being made and myths being started. For example, the example that I'd like to talk about is often when there's a mass shooting or some sort of horrific violent offense happening, it's immediately assumed that the person is psychotic, has had a psychotic break, or that they have schizophrenia, or there's some sort of mental health element involved. However, we have to decipher, okay, what are these mental health symptoms that we notice versus what are just some bad behaviors, okay? For example, when when an incident occurs, and it's maybe an incident of violence, sadly, we have to look at the person, we have to look at their history and see, is there been a diagnosis, okay? And even with a diagnosis, if you don't have grounds for NCR, which is not criminally responsible, okay, that claim, Section 16 of the Canadian Criminal Code, is brought up when either the Crown or the defense feel that the offender was experiencing a mental health break at the time. Okay, so even if you have bipolar disorder, if you have something, it needs to be present at the time of the crime. Okay, so one, you have to have a history. The second thing you have to look at is, okay, were the mental health symptoms actually impacting that person's point of view at that time? Okay, so were they experiencing delusions, meaning having beliefs that aren't true? Okay, and these beliefs could be of persecution, that someone's trying to kill them, someone's trying to harm them. Okay, the other thing that people experience are hallucinations, so they see or hear things that aren't true. Okay, and usually the only time when you see violence in mental health episodes is when the person is either experiencing paranoid hallucinations or delusions, or they're highly, highly manic, meaning they're just so inflated and so energetic. There's a word that I'm not identifying here, but that they can't just seem to come down a bit. Okay. And so only in those two situations, so mania and paranoid sort of schizophrenia, do you see any sort of violent behaviors occurring. In any other disorders, you don't see that. So when you see mass shootings and whatnot, the people automatically assume, look, someone has a mental health illness. No, usually it's just hateful behavior. That's the way we can tell, okay, is this person experiencing mental health symptoms or are they not? Okay. Typically it's hallucinations, delusions during the time of the crime. And if they're not, if you see a clear pattern of hate towards somebody, that's when you identify, no, this has nothing to do with mental health. It just has to do with poor behavior dysregulation.
Now, I guess it gets real sophisticated in that, that conscious point as you come towards, bad behavior versus, overwhelming mania or manic, right? Like you got to be so that's why you don't really hear a lot of people being successful with that defense. So mental, real mental, what would you call that though? That's beyond mental illness, a person that's, I guess, when they're having delusions and hallucinations.
So that's an episode.
Harsh,
that's when you're having a mental health episode. Yeah.
Wow.
And it goes with the disorder itself. And it's rare, it's extreme, it's very difficult to cope with. But it's even worse when people are not informed about it, they're not educated, they don't understand, because then that's where ignorance breeds.
So then as we come back from now, a real clear kind of, mental illness is a real interruption, of a person's mental health. So as we take that gradient back then, to back down to, what we were talking about, mood, thinking, and behavior, if it's not a full out mental illness, then what is it's mental off balanceness. What is that leading up gradient called?
You can call it many different things. You can call it even a scale.
Yeah.
I refer to it as a scale. We refer to it from feeling from 0, not well at all, to 100, feeling really good about yourself. Mm-hmm. Okay, and every day we can reflect to see, where am I doing? Where am I? Where do I want to be? What do I have to do to get there? Another element that we should discuss is not only the behavioral response, but the thoughts. The thoughts are usually what keep us stuck. Okay, so I'm not good enough. I'm not worthy enough. I'm hopeless. Okay? And oftentimes what we have to do is we need to even just break through our behaviors, is going out for a walk to just get a fresh of air and to just realize, okay, I needed this moment of clarity to decide, what am I doing next? What's going on with me? Okay? And when we're in those really horrible places, just cutting ourselves some slack, just being graceful to ourselves.
That's good. That's good. That's so healthy. It's been I say to everybody, it's when you first come on the show, you think it's going to last forever, but it goes by so quickly.
Yes.
And our time is done. I'm looking forward.
Oh my goodness.
I know, right? So because there's so much more to talk about, but you'll come back again, right?
You bet I will.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So
thank you so much.
Uzma Williams has been with us on Tune In with Power Psychology with our host, Brittany Meredith, on the Health and Wellness Channel, only on TVU.